I was lying on the kitchen floor when I finally understood what my daughter had become. Not the floor of some stranger's house. My kitchen, the one I had refinished myself 20 years ago. White oak planks I'd saved for over 3 years to afford. The ones my husband Richard said made the whole house feel like a home. I was lying on those floors, my hips screaming, my vision swimming, and I could hear my daughter in the other room laughing at something on her phone. She didn't come to check on me. I lay there for 11 minutes. I counted. When you have nothing else to do but stare at the ceiling and wait for the pain to either kill you or pass, you count. 11 minutes before I was able to drag myself upright using the cabinet handle, before I stood on shaking legs and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard Richard and I had planted together, the rose bushes, the old oak tree, the garden beds I couldn't tend anymore because my daughter's husband had parked his truck on them. I didn't call out for her. I already knew she wouldn't come. Let me go back to the beginning, because that's the only way any of this makes sense. My name is Chloe. I am 67 years old. I lived, for a time, in a craftsman house in Asheville, North Carolina, a house that Richard and I bought in 1991 for $82,000 and spent 30 years turning into something beautiful. Richard passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which is the cruelest kind because there is no time to say anything properly. You think you have weeks, and then suddenly you have days, and then you have hours, and then you have nothing at all. After he passed, I had the house, a modest retirement account, his life insurance, and a daughter named Melissa who called every Sunday and said all the right things. I should tell you about Melissa before she moved in, so you understand what I lost. She was not always this person. She was funny once, quick with a joke, the kind of woman who remembered your coffee order and brought it without being asked. She had a good heart, I believe, somewhere underneath everything that happened to it. But she married a man named Derek 6 years ago, and Derek had a talent I did not recognize at first because I had never encountered it in someone I loved. He had a talent for identifying what people needed to hear and saying exactly that until they trusted him completely. Then he identified what they had. Then he figured out how to take it. I did not see this about him for a long time. He was charming. He asked me questions about Richard and actually seemed to listen to the answers. He fixed things around the house when he visited. Small repairs, a leaky faucet, a screen door that had been sticking for years. I thought, Melissa chose well. I thought, this man will take care of my daughter. I was wrong on both counts. They moved in on a Tuesday in March, 2 years after Richard died. The story was that Derek's contracting business had hit a rough patch. The pandemic, then supply chain problems, then a bad partnership with someone who apparently disappeared with a significant amount of money. Melissa was working part-time at a dental office, and they had a lease ending, and could they please stay with me just for a few months, just until they got back on their feet. They had a dog named Biscuit, who Derek described as low maintenance. Biscuit was not low maintenance. I said yes, because she was my daughter and I had 4 empty bedrooms, and because I was 65 years old and living alone, and some part of me, the part I don't talk about much, was relieved to have voices in the house again. That part of me is the part that Derek had already calculated when he sat down with Melissa and made his plan. The first 3 months were almost good. Melissa helped with groceries occasionally. Derek fixed the gutter that had been pulling away from the fascia board since the previous autumn. There were dinners together on Fridays. I let myself believe it was working. Then small things began to change. Derek started referring to the house differently. Not your house the way he had before. Just the house. Then once, in passing, he said our house, and when I looked at him, he smiled and said he just meant it felt like home, and wasn't that a compliment? I told myself it was. Melissa stopped meeting my eyes at meals. The grocery contribution stopped. The Friday dinners became Derek eating in front of the television and Melissa disappearing into their room before 7 o'clock. Biscuit, who I had been asked not to worry about because he was low maintenance, was now my responsibility every morning because they both left early, and what was I going to do? Let him go hungry? I began to understand that the dynamic had shifted in a way I couldn't quite articulate yet. The way weather shifts before a storm. The air pressure changes before you see a cloud. Then Derek came to me about the loan. He sat down at my kitchen table, and he spread out papers, and he explained that there was an opportunity, a property in Weaverville, distressed, going for well under market value, and if he could get a bridge loan of $60,000, he could flip it in 4 months, and they would pay me back $100,000. He was very calm. He had a folder. He had printed out comparable sales in the area with yellow highlights. I told him I needed to think about it. He nodded and smiled and said, "Of course, absolutely, take your time." Melissa came to me that night. She sat on the edge of my bed the way she used to when she was 12 and wanted to talk about something difficult, and I felt such a rush of love for her that it actually hurt. She said, "Mom, I know it's a lot to ask." She said, "Derek really knows what he's doing with properties." She said, "This could set us up for years, and then we wouldn't have to impose on you anymore." She framed it as the solution to the problem, not as the problem itself. I gave him $50,000, not 60. I told myself I was being prudent, keeping something in reserve, being smart about it. I wrote the check, and Derek shook my hand, and Melissa hugged me, and Biscuit barked at something outside, and I went to bed that night with an uncomfortable feeling that I told myself was just nerves. The property deal collapsed, according to Derek, because the seller accepted another offer at the last minute. He was sorry. He would find another opportunity. He would pay me back. He just needed a little more time. The money did not come back. 3 months later, Derek told me about a second opportunity. I did not give him money for the second opportunity. Things changed quickly after that. Derek stopped speaking to me directly. He communicated through Melissa, and Melissa communicated with me in a tone I had never heard from her before, flat and administrative, like I was a tenant she was managing rather than her mother. Could I keep the television lower after 9 p.m. because Derek had early mornings? Could I perhaps consolidate my things in the guest room closet because they needed the hall closet for storage? Could we discuss having my car in the garage because Derek's truck was vulnerable to the weather? My car ended up in the driveway. My things ended up in one closet. I want to answer the question you're probably already asking, the same one I have asked myself 1,000 times since all of this ended. Why did I let it go on? Why didn't I simply tell them to leave? I am not a meek woman. I raised my daughter by myself for 3 years. When Richard was working in Charlotte during the week, I ran a small alterations and tailoring business out of this house for 20 years. I know how to hold my ground. Here is the answer, and it is not a comfortable one. I kept waiting for Melissa to come back. Not Derek. I had already made my accounting of Derek by that point. But Melissa, I kept waiting for her to sit on the edge of my bed again and say, "Mom, this has gotten out of hand. I'm sorry. I see what's happening." I kept extending the deadline in my mind. 1 more week, 1 more month. I told myself that if I pushed hard enough to make them leave, I would lose my daughter completely. And losing Richard had taught me that loss is permanent. I was not ready to make another permanent loss, even to save myself from what was coming. That calculation almost killed me. Not figuratively. The fall happened on a Wednesday morning in November. I was reaching for a mixing bowl on the upper shelf. My mixing bowl, my shelf, and the small step stool, which I had placed against the cabinet the night before, had been moved. Derek had moved it to reach something in the corner cabinet and left it at an angle I couldn't see. I stepped up, the stool rocked, and I went down, hip and shoulder, hard onto white oak floors. I heard Melissa's voice from the living room when I hit, heard the sound change, a pause in whatever she was watching. Then it continued. She didn't come. 11 minutes. When I finally got myself upright and walked into the living room, she looked up at me and said, "You okay?" The way you ask someone who has just stubbed their toe, not who has just fallen alone on a kitchen floor at 67. I said, "No, actually, I'm not." She put her phone down. She said, "Do you want some ibuprofen?" I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I thought about all the things I could say. I said no thank you, and went to my room and sat on the edge of my own bed and made a decision. I did not tell them I had made the decision. That was important. There is something you need to know about me that I had not told Melissa or Derek. I had not told anyone, really, because it was not something I advertised. For 11 years before I started my tailoring business, before Melissa was born, I worked as a paralegal, not at a general practice. I worked for a woman named Ruth Garland, who ran a small but exceptionally focused estate and elder law firm in Asheville. I worked there from the time I was 24 until I was 35. And in that time, I learned more about the mechanics of financial exploitation than most people ever want to know. I knew what power of attorney documents looked like. I knew because I had typed hundreds of them. I knew because 4 days after my fall, while Derek and Melissa were both out of the house, I went through the filing cabinet in what used to be Richard's study and found a folder I had never created. Inside the folder were 2 documents. The first was a power of attorney, signed with my name, notarized with a stamp I did not recognize, dated 8 months earlier. The second was a change of beneficiary form for my retirement account, also signed with my name. Neither signature was mine. I stood in Richard's study, and I held those papers, and I was very still for a very long time. My tailoring business had required steady hands, and I had them, but they were not quite steady at that moment. I thought about Richard. I thought about the oak floors. I thought about Melissa sitting in the living room while I lay on those floors counting minutes. I did not call the police. I did not confront Derek. I put the papers back exactly as I found them. I took photographs with my phone, careful to capture the notary stamp clearly. Then I closed the filing cabinet and I walked to the kitchen and I made myself a cup of tea and I called Ruth Garland. She picked up on the second ring. It had been 12 years since I'd spoken to her. She said, "Chloe, it's been ages." And her voice was exactly the same, and I had to take a moment before I could answer. I told her what I had found. Ruth Garland did not practice law anymore. She was 79 and had been retired for 6 years. But she knew every elder law attorney in Western North Carolina, and she knew which ones were exceptional and which ones were adequate, and she knew exactly who I needed. She said his name, and then she said, "Tell him Ruth sent you. He'll pick up." She paused, and then she said, "Chloe, don't touch anything else in that house that you don't have to. Don't close any accounts. Don't move any money. Just sit tight and let Thomas handle it." Thomas handled it. I will not pretend the next 6 weeks were easy. I was still in the house with them. I still passed Derek in the hallway and said good morning. I still watched Melissa feed Biscuit in the mornings and felt that grief, the specific grief of watching someone you love be someone you don't recognize. I went to 2 meetings with Thomas, and I signed legitimate documents, and I gave him the photographs. He filed a complaint with the County Register of Deeds regarding the fraudulent notarization. He contacted the retirement account custodian and flagged the forged beneficiary change before it could be processed. He sent a letter to Derek's last known business address, a letter I was not permitted to read in advance, which Thomas described only as comprehensive. The morning Derek received that letter, I was drinking coffee on the back porch watching the winter light come through the oak tree. I heard him inside, his voice at first low and then not low at all. I heard him say things that I will not repeat. I heard Melissa say his name twice, sharply. "The way you speak to someone who is frightening you." He came outside to where I was sitting. I want to be honest about this moment, because I have replayed it many times. He was not the charming man I had met 6 years ago. He was not the man who had asked about Richard and seemed to listen. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before. Or maybe I had seen it and told myself it was something else. And he said, "What did you do?" I looked at him over my coffee cup. I said, "I contacted an attorney." He said some things after that. I will not give them space here. I went inside and I called Thomas and I said I believed it was time to accelerate the timeline, and Thomas said he agreed. And 2 days later, Derek and Melissa received formal notice to vacate within 30 days. The fraud charges took longer. These things always do. The forged notarization, the attempted beneficiary fraud, Thomas was meticulous, and the documentation was clear. And the county takes elder financial exploitation seriously, particularly in cases where the forgery involved a licensed notary, who later admitted under pressure that Derek had presented false documentation to obtain her stamp. That notary lost her commission. Derek was charged with 2 counts of forgery and 1 count of elder financial exploitation. His case moved through the system the way these cases do, slowly and then all at once. And he ultimately entered a plea agreement that included restitution, probation, and a requirement that he have no contact with me. He never paid back the $50,000. The restitution order exists. Whether it is ever collected is a different question. Thomas tells me to be realistic about that. Melissa did not face charges. There was not sufficient evidence that she had direct knowledge of the forgeries, and I did not push for an investigation into her role. I have thought about that decision many times, whether it was grace or weakness or something else entirely. I do not have a clean answer. She is my daughter. She knew more than she admitted and less than Derek did, I believe. And the law and I agreed to draw the line where it fell. She called me 3 weeks after they left. She was staying with a friend in Knoxville. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't know about the documents, which I believe to be about 40% true. She cried, and I recognized her cry. I had known that cry since she was 2 years old, and it cost me something to stay quiet while she cried and not to say it's okay, which I have said to her for most of her life as a reflex. I said, "I know you're sorry, Melissa." I said, "I need a long time before I know what that means for us." She said she understood. She is in Tennessee now. We have spoken 4 times since then. The conversations are careful and short, and I don't know yet what they are building toward or whether they are building toward anything. The house is mine. It has always been mine, but now it is mine in every document and every account and every way the law can confirm a thing. Derek's truck gouged the garden beds, and I had them regraded in the spring and planted dahlias, which Richard always wanted and I always said were too fussy. They were fussy. I tended them anyway. My hip healed. The shoulder took longer. There are people who hear this story and they want it to end a particular way, with a big courtroom moment or a news story or a reunion with a daughter who is fully restored to the person she was. I understand why people want that ending. I wanted it too for a long time. Here's what I have instead. I have my house, which smells like coffee, and the cedar sachets I hang in closets and faintly, still, after all these years, like the sandalwood soap Richard used. I have my garden. I have a hip that predicts rain with moderate accuracy. I have Ruth Garland's number in my phone, which I should have had there all along. I have learned something that I wish I had known earlier, that the love you have for someone is real and it deserves to be protected. And sometimes protecting it means protecting yourself from them first. That being quiet and patient and waiting for someone to come back to themselves is not always grace. Sometimes it is just waiting on the kitchen floor, counting minutes, while the person who should come doesn't. I am not waiting on any floors anymore. I have a step stool now that I have bolted to its own base, solid and level, which goes nowhere when I step on it. It is a small thing, but every morning when I reach for that mixing bowl, I step up on something that holds me, and I stay steady, and I do not fall. That is enough. Most mornings, that is exactly enough. If you are watching this and you are sitting in a house that used to feel like yours and slowly feels less so. If someone around you is asking for access to things they have no reason to access, if you find yourself counting minutes on a floor, please hear me. You taught them everything they know. You do not have to wait for them to use it on you before you decide to protect what is yours. I wish someone had told me that sooner. I am telling you now.